So we're going to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. The denominators are going to be different. So there are a few things that we have to do first. The first thing we have to do is find the least common denominator. And if you'll remember, least means smallest, common means the same denominator of the fraction. So we need to find the smallest number that the denominators have in common. Next, we'll find the equivalent fractions using that least common denominator, and then we'll add or subtract based on the operation. And we always simplify the fraction if possible. So here's our first example. It says to find the sum, means adding, of 2/9 plus 3/12. Well, when I look at this, I have a 9 and I have a 12. So my denominators are not the same. So I need to find the least common denominator. And remember, when we're doing that, we need to think of all of the multiples. Basically, I'm thinking about my 9s on the multiplication table, and I'm thinking about my 12s. So let's look at our 9s. We'd have 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, 54, and they would go on and on. Now let's think about our 12s. 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, and so forth. So I'm going to look in these two rows, and I want to find the least, meaning the smallest number that they have in common, or the smallest number that I see in both rows. So I'm looking at the numbers to see if I see a match. Oh, there's a match, 36. So 36 is the first number that I come to that is in common with my 9s and 12s. So I'm going to make that 36 my new denominator. And remember that whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. We're trying to find that number, that fraction that is the same. So I'm looking at the denominators. What do I have to do to my 9 to get to a 36? Well, that goes up. So I know I'm multiplying. So 9 times what is 36? Well, that would be 4. And whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So I multiplied the denominator by 4, so let's do that to the numerator. 2 times 4 is 8. So what I'm saying here is that 2/9 is the same thing as 8/36. Alright, now we need to move to my other fraction. And I want to keep my denominator the same, so I'm looking at 36. And I ask myself, 12 times what is 36? Well, that would be 3. And whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So 3 times 3 is 9. Now my denominators are the same, so I simply bring it over into my answer, and I just add my numerators. 8 plus 9 is 17. And I cannot simplify this fraction, so that is my final answer, 17/36. So now let's work some problems, and we're going to see here that these are written vertically, and sometimes it's easier to see those equivalent fractions when we write them vertically. So I want to look at my first problem, and I see that it says 2/4 plus 1/7. And whenever I'm looking at this, I see the 4 is one of the denominators, and a 7 is the other denominator. So whenever I do that, I want to ask myself, what do they have in common? So if I were to think about my 4s, I would think, okay, well, I have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. I'm going to stop there. And then my 7s, I have 7, 14, 21, 28. Oh, I just wrote a 28. I see a 28 and a 28. So that's my least common denominator. So I'm going to say that 28 is my common denominator. And I ask myself, 4 times what is 28? Well, I know that that's 7. So 2 times 7 is 14. So I'm saying here that 2/4 is the same thing as 14/28, and it is. Now, 7 times what is 28. Well, that would be 4. And 1 times 4 is 4. So now my denominators are the same, so I'm going to bring that into my answer. And I'm going to add 14 plus 4 and get 18. And that can be simplified. They're both even numbers. So I know I could divide by 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. And 28 divided by 2 is 14. And that is in its simplest form. Now let's turn our attention to 2 tenths plus 2 sixths. So I need to think about my least common denominator. So let's look at the sixes. I've got 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. Let's stop there. And let's do our tens. 10, 20, 30. Oh, as soon as I see one that I've already written, I stop. There's no need to go on. So my common denominator is a 30. So now I'm going to ask myself, 10 times what is 30? Well, that's a 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. So 2 tenths is the same thing as 6 thirtieths. And now I go to the next fraction. 6 times what is 30? Well, that would be 5. So 2 times 5 is 10. And now I'm ready to add. My denominator now is 30. And 6 plus 10 is 16. I can simplify that. I can divide by 2 because they're even numbers. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. And 30 divided by 2 is 15. And that is simplest form. All right, now we have 1/7 plus 4/6. So we're going to start by looking at our sevens. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42. And looking at our sixes. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, 42. Oh, there it is, 42. So I'm going to set that equal to 42s to find my equivalent fractions. And I ask myself, 7 times what is 42? Well, that would be 6. And 6 times 1 is 6. And now 6 times what is 42? Well, that would be 7. And so 4 times 7 is 28. My denominators are now the same, so I'm ready to add my numerator. And 6 plus 28 is 34. That can be simplified. They're even numbers. So 34 divided by 2 is 17. And 42 divided by 2 is 21. And that cannot be simplified, so that is my final answer. So let's look at 2 6 plus 2 8ths. So I need to look at my sixes. Well, I already have those down here. I've got my sixes right here in this row, so I'm just going to leave those. And now let's do our eights right below that. So I have 8, 16, 24. Oh, there it is. 24 and 24. So I'm going to set that equal to 24s. And I ask myself, 6 times what is 24? Now that would be 4. And 2 times 4 is 8. And I go to my next fraction. 8 times what is 24? That's 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. My denominator is now the same, so I can add. And 8 plus 6 is 14. They're both even numbers, so I could simplify it. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 24 divided by 2 is 12. And that is my final answer. Alright, so on these problems I am subtracting. Make sure you're watching your sign. But the entire process is the exact same thing until we perform the operation. And in this case, we will subtract instead of add. So I have 1/2 minus 1/3. So my denominators are 2 and 3. Those are not the same, so I need to find the least common denominator. So let's start with our 2's. I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Let's stop there. And let's do our 3's. 3, 6. Oh, no need to go any farther. I see my 6's. So I'm going to go up here and set my fraction equal to 6's. And I ask myself, 2 times what is 6? That would be 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. Looking at the next one, 3 times what is 6? Well, that's 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. My denominator is now the same, but now remember, this time we're subtracting, and 3 minus 2 is 1. So my answer is 1/6. And then my next problem is 1/2 minus 1/4. Well, I already have my 2's here, so now I'm going to think about my 4's, and so I'm going to list those. 4, oh, I don't need to go any farther. I already have it, so my common denominator is going to be a 4. And 2 times what is 4? Well, that's 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. And 4 times what is 4? That's 1. And 1 times 1 is 1. My denominator is now the same. So I'm just going to subtract 2 minus 1 is 1. And that's my final answer.